Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing my 14.16 jungle tier list. So if you have content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were only buffs towards for jungle role this patch. We saw buffs towards Silas, Skarner, Vi, and Wukong, and then adjustments towards Kiana, and I will cover that now. So the move of Kiana is slightly better for the jungle. She gained a bit more damage towards jungle monsters on her Q, but she received a plethora of changes, some nerfs towards her ultimate and her W, a buff towards her Q at on its ratio primarily. Jungle Kiana still underperforms at the moment. Definitely something I'd still recommend avoiding. They might buff it up in the future when they might do some follow-up Kiana changes in 14.17. We don't know yet, but it could be definitely something to look out for. For the moment, she is going to be within my D tier though. Alongside Kiana, we have Malphite and Garen, which are just top laners, which can sometimes see games within the jungle. Neither of them clear particularly well. Garen is obviously a slightly better jungle option, but doesn't really have any gank potential. He really falls quite short in that, and yeah, both of these champions are very deserving of D tier spots. When it comes to elite skewed junglers, both Rengar and Kindred are kept intentionally really weak for average play. Kindred is too weak at the moment. I want to get this straight back. Like, Kindred really suffered from Kraken Slayer nerfs quite heavily, which is why you might be surprised to see her in the D tier. But this champion got nerfed and then right specialed with like her core itemization being nerfed. Definitely sucks for primarily Kindred mains. But yeah, this champion's in a pretty rough spot at the moment. Something else I'd recommend avoiding. In Rengar's case, that perfectly happy with him being weak for the average player. This champion is incredibly oppressive when you put a ton of games into it, learn its rotations correctly. Yeah, it's intentionally kept in a relatively weak spot. Alongside these two, we're gonna have these two. We're going to have Neferi. Neferi, obviously, got buffed slightly for the jungle. Had some of her, like, things, ratios changed, I believe. They helped her out, like, making the bleed a bit more generous on jungle monsters. Wasn't really enough at the time, though. She is strong within lanes, so if you do enjoy playing Neferi, just play within the lane. But she's not unplayable in the jungle. She's definitely better than the likes of Garen and Malphite. These champions are kind of like comically bad within the jungle, but she can clear, she can definitely operate here. She definitely sits towards the higher end of the D tier. Moving out of the D tier, we actually have two champions. So if Silas, who got buffed this patch, definitely helped him enough to push him out of the D tier. He's only a low C tier option, like you still are very predicated on getting early advantages, but you do have more bruisery options. You're not as explosive, which can kind of be unfortunate for jungle Silas. But yeah, the buffs definitely did help him slightly here. Alongside Silas, we have Skarner moving up. This champion is, in my opinion, is just one of the biggest misses we've had in a long time. They really messed up his rework in terms of not giving him what the Skarner mains really wanted. Like, I know a lot of Skarner mains who are really disappointed with the changes, like not really having the same level of build diversity and options, and then you just have the general player base, which just isn't really that interested in playing the champion, combined with frustrations. It has a relatively high skill ceiling. Yeah, this champion's just in a pretty rough spot at the moment. Maybe in the future we'll see some like ratio changes and some like ability changes, but for the moment its buffs were enough to push it into the C tier, but it's still a relatively low C tier option. It does have a high skill ceiling though, definitely performs a bit better in elite play for the most part. The other champions of the C tier, all the same. We have your Maokai, your Trundles. Both these champions really unpopular at the moment for, like, well, I mean, Maokai's primary role is obviously support, but he operates primarily as a competitively viable jungler with being a really low econ champion. Not great for solo queue, obviously, but can definitely operate still here, especially if you're someone who's very much willing to give resources to your team. In Trundle's case, he's been underperforming for quite a while now. Could definitely do with a bit of love, but he's very simplistic to play, which can kind of enable him to beam the C tier, but then is also slightly his downfall at this point. Eve and Nidalee both nerfed. Well, I mean, Nidalee's case was nerfed because of elite, but then Eve kind of follows suit. Eve is too weak in my opinion at the moment. Nidalee obviously is very strong still in elite and still sees some level of competitive play, which is why she can't really get any buffs at this point. But for the average player, obviously she's not as approachable with the nerfs. Yeah, in Eve's case, she's just underperforming at the moment. Sits a bit higher than Nidalee, but yeah, definitely not doing as well as she probably should be. And then the other three junglers, which have all been nerfed at this point, so we have your Zyras, your Talias, and your Gragas's. All three of these champions champions got nerfed primarily because of elite play. Tilia had like a double hit towards her jungle monster modifiers. Gragas just lost a bit of generalistic power. That was through like the passive. I believe one other change, and it just hurt him quite a decent amount in the jungle. In Zyra's case, she was underperforming when she was really starting to like ramp up in competitive. She's still viable in competitive. I know some people still do play her, but for the average player, she definitely does underperform. Her clear being as fast as it is though definitely does like attribute better in high elo and elite play. But yeah, for the average player, it does underperform for the most part. I'm actually going to drop Graves down. I've been kind of like leaning on this one for a while. Graves as a champion has just been underperforming for a while. He's kind of tanked a lot of like indirect nerfs through ranged modifiers being put on like lethality items like Umbral Glaive, Opportunity, Yomu's, three items which he really did enjoy for the most part of last split, all now have range modifiers on them. Does hurt Graves a significant amount, and his crit build just doesn't really pick up the same level of traction and popularity, and in I mean, it performs a bit better, but yeah, in popularity primarily. Doesn't really have the traction. Yeah, he sits at the higher end of the C tier at the moment. Obviously, he's a very hard champion, and if you pilot him well, you can be heavily rewarded, but not as much as probably should be. He could definitely do with some buffs, in my opinion. At the moment, the B tier, my controversial picks, my Yoriks and my Mundos. I think these champions are really underrated within the jungle. And honestly, Teemo is the other one here, out of like this trio of top laners, which actually have a level of viability within the jungle, like a solid viability. Yorick is very low elo skew. Like, don't get me wrong, this champion will aggressively fall off compared to the other two options. Teemo does also fall off, not as aggressively, but still pretty aggressively. Mundo, we've seen some people play it at like a higher level. I know there's a British jungler who plays him, and I'm pretty sure I Will Dominate who's also played some Mundo. So if you want to look around, there's definitely some like people you can kind of follow and pick it up. Yorick doesn't really see play at like a higher level, and Teemo, I know there are some people. There is a Teemo Masters player in the EU, but yeah, this champion's primarily low elo, so that's kind of where you're going to be finding a level of success on him with. But yeah, they're all kind of like mid-low B-tier options, primarily because of their simplicity and just how strong they are within low elo. Alongside these picks, though, we have Pantheon, who got buffed for the jungle back along. There is still that like obvious really high elo Korean player who plays Pantheon jungle. Definitely the person I'd recommend if you're looking for Pantheon jungle guides. This champion can work quite nicely as a jungler, but is very reliant on like aggressive snowballing, not to the same degree as like a Silas, for example, who really needs it to like amplify his clear. Pantheon has a bit stronger of a clear, but still requires that kind of like tempo to find his traction within the game. Bel'Veth nerfed primarily for elite. For the average player, it's kind of unfortunate that she's in this spot. I know a lot of people who really do enjoy playing Bel'Veth, but the way the kit's kind of been, how they've made the kit has just made it very elite skewed, making sure you're getting good invades. It's early game skewed, which for a champion like Bel'Veth, arguably just isn't really correct. But the ideology at the beginning was, oh, she's a scaling attack speed champion. She has this infinitely scaling attack speed passive, which should be like really strong in like low elo. Except for it doesn't really translate that well there, and the pick is very high elo elite skewed, so yeah, she does underperform a bit. She kind of sits within my B tier for the moment though. Zed also within my B tier, doing a bit better in the jungle at the moment. Obviously he got lots of buffs which did help him. Buffs primarily to his Q, allowing him to clear a bit better, activate that passive, which is a really aggressive jungle modifier on it. And yeah, he's a solid B tier option. Karthus got nerfed back along twice towards his Q. It hurt his clear speed, it hurt its damage output. He's still a solid high elo AP jungler. He just doesn't perform as well for the average player anymore. Hecarim, this was a pretty controversial one in my last comment section. A lot of people, well, I'd say a lot of people, two people who are frustrated that I put Hecarim in my B tier. I just, this champion is incredibly early game skewed, which primarily benefits him in higher elo. For lower elo, he very much relies on being a bit more durable oftentimes, and even then for a diver, he is squishy. Like, I'd recommend something a bit like a Vi when it's stronger. Vi right now is a bit on the weak side, and I actually have Vi next to Hecarim. They're pretty similar champions. Arguably, Vi has a bit more upfront burst. Hecarim is more reliant on tempo and like Q stacking to make it so he can output a lot of damage. Hecarim has more build variety. There are some like Zeke's builds, there are some opportunity builds. There's definitely like things you can kind of do to make this champion have a bit of a higher peak. The Hecarim obviously tends to operate a bit better in high elo. Vi, more competitive. This champion's very reliant on her point and click ultimate. Very good for shutting down high priority targets. But yeah, for the most part, I put these two champions in the B tier. They're all right for low elo, like you can make them work and you can definitely snowball games, but there are, in my opinion, substantially better options for maybe not similar things, but like other ways of gaining and like finding these pick potentials. Moving on from these two picks, we have Lee Sin, who's underperforming a bit more compared to where I actually rate him. I've had him like mid B tier. He's probably more like a low B tier option. Obviously, he's the most popular jungler in the game, so that can obviously skew him. And he's an infinitely scaling mastery curve. The more you play this champion, the better you get. It's really it's a really steep curve. And yeah, I'd recommend putting a lot of games into Lee Sin if you enjoy this champion. Obviously, he is the most popular jungler in the game, and if you're watching this video, you probably play Lee Sin, so yeah. Talon is also in my B tier. This champion, doing a bit better in the jungle. They took away his jungle monster modifier because they gave him a bit more W damage to help him in mid lane. He's been relatively neutral after that change. He's had some quality of life changes, and overall it's left him in a pretty middle spot for the jungle. He's relatively similar to Zed. You primarily play him if you're like a jungle to if you're a mid to jungle player and you have like proficiency on these champions. Obviously Talon's a bit more reliant on his invading, making sure you're getting value out of your E. When this champion was really strong, it was really oppressive to play against. Now it's fairly balanced. You really have to find those angles and yeah, like be able to pick your timings well for the most part. He does also struggle a bit more on objective clearing. Elise is a kind of forgotten jungler at this point. Like, at least in seasons past, used to be a lot more popular. She also had a brief like popularity spike when, I don't know if it was Night Harvester or beginning of this split, but like one of the items was really strong on her and she saw some competitive play, which was good to see, but then she relatively quickly either got nerfed or forgotten about. Maybe like the item she was abusing was nerfed down, but overall at the moment she kind of sits as like a forgotten B tier option. She hasn't been nerfed like the other AP options, which is why she does tend to be a bit better, but then she's early game skewed. She's not as she's really reliant on her burst potential. Arguably she can be easier to execute just as like a standalone champion, but she is also a transform champion, which does mean she has accessibility to six abilities, which can kind of be hard to manage in situations. So there are difficulties of playing this pick, and she is early game AP skewed, but she hasn't been nerfed, so she sits as like a solid B tier option. Teemo, I've already spoken about. Sejuani, also my B tier. She's a fine tank for solo queue now. They made the health ratio changes on her W not too long ago. Really helped her for solo queue, in fact. I wouldn't be surprised if going into Worlds they end up nerfing this champion. Obviously, it's a very strong competitive pick, very low econ. All her kit is hard CC for the most part. Really good synergies with champions. Like, she's the perfect pro play tank for the most part. Obviously, when she's weak in competitive, she's very weak in solo queue for the most part. But for the moment, she's a solid solo queue option, a good B tier tank. You can't really carry games on Sejuani, but you can really comfortably enable certain champions to like absolutely thrive. And especially with Katarina being stronger at the moment, can definitely pair really nicely with a champion that is a pretty historically strong pairing. Alongside obviously like your Camille's and your Aurelia's. Poppy is also with my B tier. Very good anti-dash champion. Great into AD options primarily. You can go like your tank builds, your Sundered Sky variations. I can't see her here. Am I blind? No, I just haven't added her. But yeah, she has two build variations, but she's primarily utilized as a counter pick. She does see some competitive, but obviously for solo queue, she can be like a perfectly viable bruiser option with the Sundered Sky variation. Moving on for Poppy with Kayn, who's doing a bit better at the moment. Obviously, blue Kayn is a bit underperformant. Red Kayn tends to be a bit better with some of the love it received, like with the health ratio on the passive. Obviously, the build variations can line up with like Eclipse into like primarily bruiser options. That'll be like your Sundered Skies, your Sterixes, your Shojans, Cleaver. I've completely forgotten about the primary option there. Yeah, all these work quite nicely on him, and yeah, he's a pretty solid B tier pick. Nunu doing a bit better with the Protobelt buff. Obviously, there are two variations of Nunu. You have the tank variation, which is like your Sunfire into primary tank build, or you have your AP variation, or even an AP hybrid. I've seen some kind of lean into that with your Protobelts, your Rabadons, obviously, and then like you can kind of flex on some of your other AP options. That does do a huge amount of damage, and they've actually at this point really aggressively buffed a lot of Nunu's AP ratios to make it viable. And yeah, arguably Nunu solid beta option. He's got a pretty high mastery curve, pretty deceptively. Like Nunu, you look at him and think, this champion's pretty easy, but there's a lot of skill to the pick. It's very unique in a way with how its snowball operates. And yeah, I mean, the pick's a solid beta. You put the games in, you'll definitely be rewarded on a champion like this. Shaco, also a really high mastery champion. Obviously, if you've watched Shriek's video, I think he talks a bit about Shaco and how this champion obviously has a high mastery curve because of its unique clear. It's the clone being a very different ability compared to a lot of champions. Daisy has fairly similar mastery curve with like learning how to utilize Daisy, moving her so she can get the knock up more effectively in certain situations. There's lots of nuances to it, and in Shaco's case, he's a solid beta option. You have the AP and the AD build variation. AD with the Halo Blades, very early game skewed. AP with the Dark Harvest tends to be a bit more late game skewed, but has great like objective control, and I think it can be really effective in certain team comps. But then some of your teammates might be frustrated if you play AP because obviously it's not going to be as effective earlier on into the game. Rek'Sai, Rumble, and Jax make up my beta, so I will fill them in. In Rek'Sai's case, she's a bit more elite skewed. Obviously, the changes they made to her, giving her the AoE and knockup, definitely gives her more, maybe not skill expression, but like more outplay big moment potential. Whereas there's definitely times where you can really find those angles. She's still relatively unpopular. Obviously, the champion's never really going to be popular, but her map control, her unique gank angles, her itemization is primarily bruiser. You don't really go the lethality options anymore. Yeah, she's a solid B2 option. If you put the games in, once again, like some of these picks here, you'll be definitely rewarded for it. Rumble and Jax, also top laners, which have come down, or which like worked as like jungle options. In Jax's case, and in Rumble's case, in fact, both of them have been nerfed for top lane, which has hurt them indirectly in the jungle. But in Jax's case, you primarily utilize him as an anti-auto attacker. Wouldn't really recommend playing him outside of those situations. In Rumble's case, he is a great ultimate combined with his clear being pretty aggressive. Can definitely function quite nicely within the jungle. One of my more underrated picks. Yeah, you can definitely find success on a champion like this. Moving on to the A tier. So the biggest winner of this patch is Wukong. He arguably sits towards the high end of the A tier. The one armor buff combined with the my brain isn't remembering, the 5% attack speed he received on E has been huge for amping up his clear speed, makes his dueling potential against AD junglers a bit stronger, and obviously once you have fully stacked passive, that is 5 or 4, I once again can't remember off the top of my head how many stacks it's now for Wukong passive because they changed it, but now when you fully stack passive, I believe it's 5. It's really effective for like the jungle pet modifier with the armor on that being like really beneficial for clear speed. And yeah, Wukong really solid A tier champion. Once again, reliant on like a 2-item power spike, but he is an incredible team fighter once you hit it. Once you've got your T2 ultimate hit level 11, yeah, once you have the items, this champion can be really unstoppable and really oppressive within the game. Obviously, the A tier is going to consist of arguably 2 lots of champions. You have like my lower A tier, which is the Zac, the Yi, Jarvan, Xin Zhao. Jarvan's a bit better than Xin Zhao in my opinion, but both of them still really solid options. Relatively similar playstyles, early game aggressive picks, which are like, yeah, a bit more team orientated. Xin has a bit more carry potential. Jarvan obviously a bit more team fight agency within that space. Ivan and Viego are going to be the other 2 champions, which I'd arguably separate from the rest of the A tier. Like this is like a lower A tier section, if anything. Ivan, people just haven't really moved over to the correct build. Redemption has looked like the best option on him for a while now. Obviously, there are games where you can go Moonstone. In Viego's case, he indirectly got nerfed by the Kraken Slayer changes. There are some people moving over to the Trinity build, but not quite enough to really like gauge just how strong it is. So I'm kind of like leaving him as like a mid A tier option. Jarvan's in. probably operate a bit better than these two picks. Yi and Zac. Zac's actually kind of fallen down a bit within the jungle. He's not as favourable here as he is in like the top lane at the moment, but he can still work quite nicely. Obviously, he does have some like offensive build options with like Yiliandries and stuff if you are opting into Fated Ashes. In Yi's case, he got massively buffed, like massively over buffed, in fact got nerfed back down, and now he's in a relatively solid A spot where like if you get the kills early, this champion obviously snowballs incredibly obnoxiously. It can be really hard to play against a Yi if you don't have the tools to like shut it down, whether that's like your point and click CC or your kite back power, being able to like space him before he's really able to get onto you and start like chain attacking. Can be quite quite a good way of like managing him. The pick is arguably like a low A tier option at the moment, and then you have the rest of my A tier. So Gwen and Morgana, kind of underrated picks at the moment. Morgana thankfully has seen some competitive. This champion obviously can look useless if you don't have the setup for it, but if you like get to those spikes, get your items, you have set up for your Q, this champion can be really hard to play against, especially if she's coming in as an answer to comps. We've seen it primarily as an answer to Vi in competitive. You're not going to have those same situations in solo queue, obviously, but if you can like find angles where you can get value out of Black Shield. My favourite one has always been the Rammus-Morgana interaction, where if you see Rammus on the enemy team, jungle, like you somehow have jungle still open, Morgana is an incredible answer to Rammus. It always has been. Obviously, Black Shield has insane value in that matchup, and the Q can be a really good tool to shutting him down. In Gwen's case, she's an underrated jungler. I'm glad we've seen Droop play it. That is something which she's definitely leaned into playing a bit. The clear speed, pretty good. The free item power spike is one of the strongest in the game. Has been for a while. That would be the Nash's Riftmaker Rabadon trio of items. And yeah, she's a pretty underrated jungler at the moment. Echo and Diana still both really good AP options here. Both very aggressive AP ratios on their passive. Briar arguably could be moved up to S tier for low elo. This champion obviously dominates low and mid elo. Tends to fall off by the time you hit like Emerald into Diamond. Obviously the ult is something people can react to a lot more frequently. The kit tends to be a bit more people play against the kit a bit more frequently, like well against it. English, I failed once again. And then Kha'Zix, great AD assassin snowball option. He's been buffed for with the flat damage on the Q, which really did help him at the time, and it's like maintained him a solid spot in the A tier. And honestly, for like your diamonds and hires, not towards like even actually towards challenger level, like this pick still is really good. Like he's a great snowball AD assassin option, and honestly, yeah, deserving of an A tier spot at the moment. Mordekaiser, also kind of underrated, kind of like Gwen, like a top laner who can work really nicely in the jungle because of their really aggressive clear speed, and then combined with like some of the power they have. Mordekaiser obviously a bit more early game skewed compared to the likes of Gwen, but he's very stat checky. He's great as like an answer to enemy junglers. Great objective control, decent clear speed. The gang's a bit weak, but he's good team fighting if you can like pick out the right targets. Very solid A tier pick. I used to play Mordekaiser jungle in the past. It was a picker which I really did enjoy quite a bit. Rammus probably sits towards mid A tier. This champion really benefited from the like multiple marksmen within the game, because obviously he is very good into AD targets. When we start seeing the shift towards more majors, this champion will definitely fall down a bit, and arguably once we hit like primarily just AP mid laners like most games, maybe if we see like Yasuo and Yone get nerfed, then yeah, this champion could definitely drop to the B tier. You have to be very like aware of where you are playing Rammus. This champion is very, very game dependent, which is why I moved it originally down from the S tier to the A tier, because he was like doing so well within the meta at the time. But yeah, more at the moment he's like a mid A tier option, but obviously if you find the counter pick angle, you just have to slam this champion. He is very strong in those spaces. And Warwick and Fiddle will wrap up my A tier. Warwick is a kind of underrated jungler. They buffed him not too long ago on his W quite aggressively, and he's definitely been doing a lot better since then. In Fiddle's case, people have started to catch on to this champion actually being pretty decent within the jungle, combined with some of the other AP junglers being nerfed. He's definitely like risen up in priority, not towards the, like, we're not going to really see him in competitive. I don't think anyone's playing Fiddle in competitive competitive. This champion is actually a pretty aggressive, steep learning curve. But like if you put the games in, you can once again be really rewarded. But he's doing a bit better than some of the other options just generalistically. So yeah, really solid A tier pick. And then my S tier. So same champions. In fact, Shyvana's dropped down from the S plus to the S tier. I actually overrated her last patch. I went from underrating to overrating to underrating to overrating. I kind of had like a mix around. Like I was aware of how strong she was, but then I overrated her based on how strong she was. But then people picked up, so I moved her up, and then I moved her back. Then I moved her up when she got nerfed, because I was like, oh yeah, people still think this champion's obviously really strong, and like I do think this pick is incredibly strong, and arguably still one of the best, if not just outright the best low elo jungler. But picks like Amumu. Like, I love Amumu. I think this champion is incredibly underrated and more people should play it, especially if they are struggling with some of the some aspects of jungle, whether that's like the mechanics of certain champions. He's a really low baseline, and you can like easily pick this champion up. His ultimate obviously has a huge AoE. His clear speed's relatively good once you have Fated Ashes. But obviously if you're going like the Liandry variation, you do just have the primary tank variation with like your Sunfire and stuff. But yeah, Amumu, these two picks still like at the top of my S tier. Lilia and Brand are still great AP options. They are both being nerfed in 14.17. They convert a bit better into the higher elos for sure. Brand obviously still a very strong competitive option. And obviously Lilia still also sees a decent amount of competitive. Then the other three champions here, Nocturne, Udyr, and Volibear, which none of these three see competitive. I think actually Nocturne might have seen some. Yeah, Nocturne, still a great solo queue jungler, has been for a while. Now that people have moved over to Stridebreaker first, which, like, thank God, that had been the correct option for a while. Yeah, he really, like, aggressively spikes on that item, as it allows him to really aggressively chase targets. Massively spikes once he has, like, either Ultimate Hunter stacks or, like, at 11 with, like, your Lucidities for the most part. Yeah, this champion's really good within the jungle at the moment, a great AD option. Udyr, bit higher, bit harder to play, can definitely still be really powerful, though. I'd recommend putting more games into Udyr. He's probably the hardest out of the 7 picks here within my S tier. But yeah, you can be really heavily rewarded for this champion, though. He didn't get nerfed along with the other champions when with like how powerful Fated Ashes is as a clearing item. So yeah, he's definitely thriving off that. And Volibear, still one of my recommended champion, like very heavily like recommended champions for how easy it is to play. Point and click CC, heavy burst damage, very easy dive angles with his obviously really powerful ultimate. Recommend avoiding the Roa build within the jungle. I see a lot of people just default on it. Sundered Sky oftentimes is by far a superior option. You should really be looking to pick that item up a substantially large amount of times. Combined with like a Dead Man, see it's great chase potential, great burst, great damage. Yeah, this pick's really good at the moment. Definitely deserving of an S tier spot. Those are my thoughts for the jungle tier list at the moment. Honestly, jungle as well, not too unbalanced. There are definitely picks which like are above the rest. I'd argue the high end of the A tier combined with the S tier are definitely like really thriving, especially in mid and low elo. So these picks obviously really strong within high. The likes of Kha'Zix doing quite well there. The B and C tier tend to be where most of the high elo picks are, either because they're harder to execute, rely more on closing out games early, snowball potential, yeah, mechanics, stuff like that. That can all like be pretty heavy factors there. But yeah, those are my thoughts for the mid and low elo tier list. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.